Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive topic, the stay or go dilemma. You know the feeling, right? We've all been at that crossroads at some point, staring down a choice that just feels, well, entirely impossible. We're going to lean on clinical psychology, real-world research, and some really powerful personal experiences to figure out exactly why our brains keep us stuck, and more importantly, how you can finally make your next move with confidence. So, let's get into it. Do I stay or do I go? Man, few questions feel heavier than that one. You can probably feel the weight of it just hearing those words out loud. Whether it's a relationship that's totally run its course, a job that's just draining the life out of you, or a living situation that doesn't fit anymore, there's rarely a simple answer. It gets so layered with hope, fear, personal history, and just deep uncertainty. And hey, that emotional overwhelm, it is completely valid. Our brains are literally hardwired to crave certainty. We are biologically driven to predict outcomes and avoid regret at all costs. So the longer we sit with this question, the bigger and more paralyzing it gets. Which brings us to Section 1, the stay or go dilemma, the burden of choice. This burden is such a universal human experience. We often find ourselves totally trapped by the hope that things will magically get better, the fear of the unknown, and the heavy weight of our history in that relationship or career. We basically start suffocating in our own comfort zones. So moving into Section 2, the psychology of staying, why our brains trick us. Let's take a clinical look at why we actually stay in situations that are making us absolutely miserable. Because, spoiler alert, it is not just about a lack of willpower. There are these really powerful, unseen mental frameworks keeping us locked right in place. And a huge part of that is trauma bonding. Understanding this completely removes the shame around feeling stuck. If you've ever asked yourself, why can't I just leave? Well, the answer often lies right here in these biological and psychological loops. It happens when the intense emotional highs and the really painful lows of a situation get so tangled up together that your brain essentially gets addicted to the roller coaster. The relief you feel during the good times right after the bad times creates a massive chemical attachment. It makes it incredibly difficult to just walk away even when logic is screaming at you that the situation is toxic. It's not weakness, guys. It's literally a psychological loop. And this fear of leaving, it's totally backed by science. There was this fascinating study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships that looked into why people stay committed to unhappy relationships. They found that what they call attachment anxiety drives this massive fear of change. But the really crucial finding here is that the fear of being alone acts as a serial mediator. What that means is the anxiety feeds the fear of change, which then feeds the fear of being alone, and that whole cycle is what keeps us trapped in a miserable status quo. We're literally choosing a familiar unhappiness over the perceived terror of just being by ourselves. Crazy, right? Let's transition to Section 3, the weight of emotional fatigue. We really need to examine the emotional toll of what happens when love, or even your daily 9 to 5, starts feeling like a punishing duty rather than a fulfilling choice. Picture this dynamic. On one side, you've got the emotional caretaker. This is the person doing all the invisible heavy lifting, right? They're constantly checking in, diffusing tensions, basically acting as the glue holding the whole relationship together. Then on the other side, you have the emotionally absent partner. They might be completely unaware of the toll this is taking. They grow complacent, they don't reciprocate, and they just internalize the relationship as being quote-unquote fine. When this kind of emotional labor is completely one-sided, the caretaker eventually hits a wall of profound resentment, total exhaustion, and ironically, a really deep sense of loneliness while still inside the relationship. So, how do we actually fix that imbalance and move toward emotional restoration? Well, it starts with honest communication. Using I statements to avoid pointing fingers and casting blame. But honestly, the absolute most vital step here is establishing firm emotional boundaries. In mental health, boundaries get a bad rap. People think they're cold or distant. But clinical psychology tells us that our emotions are signals, not moral failures. Setting emotional boundaries, like prioritizing your own self-care and disentangling your feelings from someone else's, is an act of profound self-respect. It's not selfish at all. You literally cannot pour from an empty cup. All right, Section 4, fear versus action mindsets. Let's dive into the core psychological contrast that really dictates how we ultimately make the choice to stay or leave. It all boils down to the lens through which you're viewing the world. Psychology today breaks down two dominant approaches when you're contemplating a major life change, and your mindset here absolutely dictates your success. First, you have a fear-based mindset. This means you make choices simply to avert pain. You stay because you're terrified of the negative repercussions, like being alone or maybe taking a financial hit. You're basically trading genuine happiness for a misguided sense of being safe. But on the flip side, an action-based mindset, which is also sometimes called a faith-based mindset, means you leave to move toward a specific goal. You take calculated risks for the future you know you deserve, and you focus on the potential opportunities ahead. The data is super clear on this. People who leave a situation moving toward a goal end up vastly more successful and fulfilled than those who leave just running away from fear. I want to share a highly relatable story that perfectly captures this action mindset. It's about speaker and writer Daniel Midson Short. At age 30, Daniel found himself sitting in his office way before anyone else even arrived, staring out the window. He was $40,000 in debt, stuck in a miserable relationship, and just totally suffocating in this mediocre corporate job. He looked around and realized everyone was just settling for the exact same tired routine. Now, he had immense fear of failure and losing the tiny bit of comfort he'd built, but then it hit him. The pain of staying the exact same for the rest of his life was actually way scarier than any fear or risk he would face by making a change. Which brings us to our final section, the power of starting over. Let's talk about how you can empower yourself to cross that threshold into a completely new life, just like Daniel did. See, Daniel didn't just sit around wishing for a better life. He took massive action. He followed some really concrete steps to reinvent his routine and his identity. First, he totally changed his environment. He actually moved to a new country, which forced a total hard reset of his daily habits. 2, he improved his skills. He joined Toastmasters to conquer his terror of public speaking. 3, he changed his physical image and got into fitness, which completely shifted how he viewed himself. 4, he started a new hobby just for the pure fun of being a beginner again. 5, he expanded his social group because, they say you're the average of the people you spend the most time with. And 6, he simply started taking more risks. These steps are proof that whether you're in your 30s, 40s, or way beyond, you absolutely have the power to start over. When you're agonizing over whether to stay or go, here is the most important thing to remember. The decision is not about choosing perfectly. Overcoming this paralysis isn't about finding some flawless, guaranteed answer. It's about stepping out of that mental loop of endless overthinking. We can't predict the future, right? And waiting around for 100% certainty is exactly the thing that keeps you trapped. Clarity doesn't come from just sitting there thinking about it. It comes from reconnecting with yourself and actually taking a step forward. So I want to leave you with one final, really important question to ask yourself. Which choice aligns with who you are right now? Not who you were 5 years ago when you first started the job or the relationship, and definitely not who other people expect you to be. As you navigate your own crossroads, I highly encourage you to prioritize your authentic self and your core values over your fears. These impossible decisions, they actually become possible the very second you decide your future is worth the risk. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this gives you the clarity you need to make your next great move.